The hum of soft jazz filled the air as Marcus Reed pushed open the glass doors of his own hotel. The polished brass handles gleamed under the warm glow of the chandeliers, and the marble floors reflected every light, making the lobby feel opulent and inviting. For most, this hotel was a symbol of excellence, but for Marcus it was more than that. It was his legacy. Today he wasn't here as the owner but as a guest, stepping into the shadows to uncover the truth. Dressed in a pair of well-worn jeans and a simple jacket, Marcus walked into the lobby, blending in with the everyday clientele. His crisp, tailored suits were left at home for this visit, and his appearance was intentionally nondescript. There was no fanfare, no name tag announcing his authority. He wanted to see how his staff treated guests when no one was watching, especially those who might not look like their typical patrons. He had built this hotel from the ground up with one vision: a space where everyone, regardless of race or background, could experience true hospitality. Yet stories he had overheard from other black travelers, stories of subtle slights and overt dismissals, nagged at him. He wanted to believe his hotel was different, but today was about finding out for sure. Marcus moved slowly toward the reception desk. The air carried a faint scent of fresh lilies, and everything looked pristine. A group of employees stood behind the desk, their uniforms crisp and professional, their expressions polite but distant. At first glance, they appeared attentive and prepared to serve, but Marcus's experience in the hospitality industry told him to look closer. Outward appearances could easily hide inward failings. He stopped at the desk where a young man in his late 20s, Jake, stood typing on the computer. Jake wore the standard receptionist uniform, a navy blazer with the hotel logo neatly embroidered on the lapel. His hair was perfectly combed, and his smile seemed genuine when he greeted a well-dressed couple earlier. But as Marcus approached, something changed. Jake's body language stiffened. He didn't look up. Instead, he tapped away at his keyboard, deliberately ignoring Marcus's presence. "Good afternoon," Marcus said, keeping his tone friendly yet firm. Jake barely glanced at him, muttering under his breath, "Yes? Can I help you?" His tone was flat, almost impatient, as though Marcus were interrupting something more important. Marcus felt the familiar pang of disappointment rise in his chest. He had been here many times before, in countless other places, judged not by his character or his accomplishments, but by the color of his skin and the simplicity of his clothes. He brushed it aside for now, keeping his composure. This wasn't about his ego. This was about uncovering the truth. "Yes, I have a reservation," Marcus replied, his tone calm. Jake raised an eyebrow, barely concealing his skepticism. Without even glancing at the computer screen, he said, "Sorry, we're fully booked." Fully booked. Marcus knew this wasn't true. He had personally reviewed the reservations that morning and knew several rooms were available. He felt the sting of the lie but held his ground. "Could you double-check that for me?" he asked, his voice steady. Jake sighed audibly, finally typing a few keys on the keyboard in a show of minimal effort. His fingers hovered over the keys as if he was performing a tedious task beneath him. "Nope," he said after a few seconds. "Nothing available." Behind Jake, a second employee, Emily, caught Marcus's eye. She leaned toward Jake and whispered something, her gaze flickering briefly to Marcus. Marcus couldn't hear every word, but her tone carried a quiet derision. "Maybe we should just get security," she murmured, not bothering to lower her voice enough to keep Marcus from catching the gist. Marcus remained outwardly calm, but her words hit hard. The idea that he, the owner of this very establishment, could be dismissed as a problem before any real interaction took place was infuriating. Yet, he stayed rooted, choosing not to reveal his identity just yet. He needed to see this situation play out to its full extent. "I think there's been a mistake," Marcus said. "I made the reservation myself. Could you please check again?" Jake's irritation was now evident. He rolled his eyes as if Marcus were wasting his time. "Look, I told you. We're booked. Maybe try somewhere else," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. Emily stood silently beside him, smirking faintly as if she found the whole situation amusing. Marcus took a deep breath, forcing himself to remain composed. Inside, a storm brewed. He could feel the weight of years of discrimination, not just his own but that of countless others who had been judged for how they looked rather than who they were. This wasn't just about him. This was about something much larger. Behind him, a family walked into the lobby, their suitcases rolling softly against the marble floor. Jake's demeanor shifted immediately. His posture straightened, and his tone grew warm as he greeted them with a polished, "Welcome to the hotel. How can I assist you today?" Marcus observed the transformation, his stomach sinking. The stark contrast in how Jake treated different guests was undeniable. He realized this wasn't just an isolated incident. It was a symptom of something deeper. As the family checked in without issue, Marcus stepped back from the desk, his mind racing. He wasn't going to reveal himself yet. He wanted to see how far they would go. Turning toward a nearby couch, he sat down and watched as the scene unfolded. The spark of resolve in his chest grew brighter. Today wasn't just about exposing a few bad apples. It was about addressing the root of the problem. Marcus sat on the plush leather couch in the corner of the hotel lobby, his eyes scanning the scene as he silently absorbed the atmosphere. The room was abuzz with activity, bellhops moving briskly with luggage carts, a concierge warmly guiding a guest to a list of local attractions, and the faint hum of conversations floating through the air. The hotel exuded luxury, but Marcus knew that the true test of an establishment wasn't in its chandeliers or marble floors. It was in how people were treated. His thoughts were interrupted by a sharp voice at the front desk. "Sir, I've already told you there are no rooms available," Jake said, his tone now carrying an edge of irritation. The words sliced through the air, drawing the attention of a few nearby guests. Marcus rose from his seat and returned to the desk, determined to maintain his calm demeanor. "I understand your position, but I believe there's been a misunderstanding," he said, his voice steady. "I made this reservation myself, and I'd appreciate it if you could check once more." Jake glanced up from the computer, his expression hardening as though Marcus's mere presence was a challenge to his authority. Without bothering to look at the system again, he shook his head dismissively. "There's no misunderstanding. We're fully booked." Marcus's patience was wearing thin, but he kept his composure. Years of experience had taught him how to remain calm under pressure, even when faced with blatant disrespect. "Then perhaps you could show me a printout of today's bookings," Marcus suggested. His tone was polite but firm, signaling that he wasn't going to back down. Jake sighed dramatically, clearly frustrated by the request. "I'm not obligated to show you anything," he replied, leaning back against the desk with crossed arms. "If you don't have a room here, there's really nothing else to discuss." As if on cue, Emily, the other receptionist, approached. She leaned toward Jake and whispered something, but her voice was loud enough for Marcus to hear snippets. "Just call security. Wasting time." Marcus felt a surge of anger rise in his chest but pushed it down. He wasn't ready to reveal his identity, not yet. He wanted to see just how far this would go. He remained standing at the desk, his expression calm but resolute. "I'd like to speak to a manager," Marcus said, shifting tactics. He knew that escalating the situation would bring in someone with more authority, someone who might recognize him, or at least approach the situation with more professionalism. Jake scoffed, clearly unfazed by the request. "The manager's busy right now. Besides, they'll just tell you the same thing I did." Emily chuckled softly at his side, the sound grating on Marcus's nerves. The tension in the room was palpable. Guests waiting nearby cast curious glances toward the desk, sensing the undercurrent of hostility. Marcus noticed a bellhop in the corner hesitate, his eyes darting nervously between Jake and Marcus, but the young man said nothing. It was clear that Jake's behavior wasn't an isolated incident. It reflected a culture of silence and complicity. Marcus's instincts told him it was time to escalate. "If the manager is unavailable, I'd like to speak to someone from corporate," he said firmly, knowing full well that this request would only heighten their discomfort. He watched as Jake's face flushed slightly, his earlier arrogance faltering. "Corporate?" Jake repeated, feigning confidence but clearly unsure of how to respond. "Look, sir, I don't know who you think you are, but you're not getting special treatment here." Special treatment. The words hung in the air, their implications stinging more than Marcus cared to admit. He wasn't asking for special treatment, just the same respect and service afforded to everyone else. Before Marcus could respond, Emily stepped forward, her voice dripping with condescension. "We don't need to involve corporate over something so trivial," she said. If you don't have a reservation, you're welcome to try another hotel. Marcus took a deep breath, his resolve hardening. I'd like to remind you, he said, his voice steady, that I've done nothing to warrant this treatment. I've been polite, I've made a reasonable request, and I've given you multiple opportunities to address the situation. Yet here we are. Jake and Emily exchanged uneasy glances, their earlier confidence beginning to waver. It was clear that Marcus wasn't going to back down, and the pressure was starting to get to them. Still, they held their ground, their biases blinding them to the gravity of the situation. Just then, a new voice broke through the tension. Is there a problem here? It was the hotel's head of security, a tall, broad-shouldered man named Eric. His presence immediately shifted the dynamic, his authoritative tone commanding attention. Jake quickly pointed to Marcus. This gentleman doesn't have a reservation and refuses to leave, he said, his voice laced with indignation. Marcus turned to Eric, meeting his gaze squarely. I've done nothing but ask for my reservation to be checked, he said calmly. I've been dismissed, ignored, and now threatened with removal. All I've asked for is basic respect. Eric studied Marcus for a moment, his brow furrowing. Something in Marcus's demeanor seemed to give him pause, but he ultimately sided with Jake. Sir, if you've been asked to leave, I suggest you do so, Eric said, his tone firm but not unkind. No. Marcus felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He had seen enough. It was time to reveal the truth. Reaching into his jacket pocket, Marcus pulled out his ID card and handed it to Eric. Perhaps this will clarify things, he said, his voice calm but resolute. Eric's eyes widened as he read the card, his face draining of color. He looked back at Marcus, his expression shifting from authority to alarm. Jake and Emily leaned closer, their smug expressions melting into shock as they realized what was happening. This can't be, Jake stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. Oh, but it is, Marcus replied, his gaze locking onto Jake's. I'm Marcus Reed, owner of this hotel. The lobby fell silent, the weight of the revelation sinking in. Marcus watched as the color drained from Jake and Emily's faces, their earlier arrogance replaced by sheer panic. The tables had turned, and Marcus knew that what came next would shape the future of his hotel and the people who worked there. The silence in the lobby was deafening. Marcus's declaration that he was the owner of the hotel hung in the air like a thunderclap. Jake and Emily stood frozen, their earlier arrogance melting into unease. Even Eric, the head of security, who had just moments ago tried to escort Marcus out, now looked like a man grappling with an earthquake beneath his feet. Marcus exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of the moment settle on his shoulders. He knew this wasn't just about him. It was about everyone who had ever walked into this hotel and been judged unfairly. Shall we start again? Marcus asked, his tone calm but laced with authority. I'll give you one last chance to explain yourselves. Jake opened his mouth, but no words came out. His face was pale, his earlier bravado replaced by a growing panic. Emily, standing beside him, fidgeted nervously, her eyes darting to the door as if hoping to escape the uncomfortable confrontation. I didn't realize, Jake began, his voice trembling. That much is clear, Marcus interrupted, his gaze piercing. What I'm trying to understand is why. Why did you assume I didn't belong here? Why didn't you check my reservation properly? Why was I treated as a problem the moment I walked through the door? Jake looked down at the desk, avoiding Marcus's eyes. Emily tried to step in, her voice faltering. We just thought... Marcus cut her off with a sharp glance. You thought what? That I didn't look the part? That I couldn't possibly be a guest here? Or is it because you've decided that some people aren't worth your time? Emily flushed, her hands twisting together. It's not like that, she stammered. We didn't mean anything by it. Marcus took a step closer to the desk, his presence commanding. You didn't mean anything by it? He repeated, his voice low but steady. That's the problem. You didn't think at all. You didn't think about how your actions might impact someone else. You didn't think about how your biases might cloud your judgment. You just reacted, and your reaction was to dismiss me. Eric, the head of security, cleared his throat, drawing Marcus's attention. Mr. Reed, he began, his tone measured. I take full responsibility for the actions of my team. This was a misunderstanding, and I'll make sure it doesn't happen again." "A misunderstanding?" Marcus echoed, his gaze locking onto Eric's. "Tell me, what exactly did you misunderstand? That I wasn't dressed in a suit? That I didn't announce my status as the owner the moment I walked in? Or is it deeper than that?" Eric shifted uncomfortably under Marcus's scrutiny. I didn't mean it that way," he said, his voice quieter now. "We were just following standard procedures." Marcus shook his head, his disappointment evident. "If this is your standard, then the standard is broken." He turned to the hotel manager, who had arrived moments earlier and was now standing off to the side, watching the scene unfold with a look of mounting dread. "And you," Marcus said, pointing at him, "this is your team, your responsibility. What are you doing to ensure this doesn't happen again? Not just to me, but to anyone." The manager stepped forward, his face pale. "Mr. Reed, I deeply apologize," he said, his voice quivering. "I assure you we'll conduct training, sensitivity training for all staff. This is unacceptable, and it will be addressed immediately." Marcus studied him for a moment, then nodded slightly. "That's a start," he said. "But training alone won't fix what's broken. This isn't just about behavior. It's about the culture you've created here. A culture where guests are judged by their appearance instead of their character. A culture where prejudice is allowed to dictate how people are treated." The words hit hard, and the weight of them settled over the room. Marcus knew he had their attention, but he wasn't finished yet. He gestured toward Jake and Emily. "You two," he said, his voice firm but not unkind. "This is your chance to reflect. Ask yourselves why you acted the way you did. Was it frustration? Assumptions? Bias? Whatever the reason, it's not good enough." Jake looked up, his face red with embarrassment. "I'm sorry," he muttered. "I didn't realize—" "No," Marcus interrupted, holding up a hand. "You didn't, but now you do. And the question is, what are you going to do about it?" Jake nodded slowly, his expression one of shame and determination. Emily, standing beside him, seemed equally shaken. "We'll do better," she said softly. Marcus took a deep breath, feeling the tension in the room begin to shift. The confrontation had been necessary, but it wasn't about punishment. It was about creating a moment of clarity, a moment where the staff could see the consequences of their actions and the importance of change. He turned back to the manager. "This hotel is a reflection of its leadership," Marcus said. "If you want this place to succeed, it needs to be more than just luxurious. It needs to be welcoming, inclusive, a place where every guest feels valued." The manager nodded, his expression resolute. "Understood, Mr. Reed. We'll make the necessary changes." Marcus glanced around the room, his gaze lingering on the staff who had gathered to watch the scene unfold. "This isn't just about this hotel," he said, addressing them directly. "It's about every interaction you have, every guest who walks through that door. You have the power to make someone feel welcome, or to make them feel small. Choose wisely." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving the staff to reflect on the lesson they had just learned. As he exited the lobby, Marcus felt a mixture of emotions: frustration, hope, and a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about him. It was about creating a ripple effect, one conversation at a time, until change became inevitable. The next day, Marcus sat at his desk in the penthouse suite of the hotel, staring out at the city skyline. The confrontation in the lobby had weighed on him all night. He had spent years building his business, but this wasn't just about his hotel. It was about the systemic issues that allowed bias and prejudice to fester unchecked. He took a deep breath and opened his laptop. If change was going to happen, it needed to start now. By mid-morning, Marcus had summoned the senior management team for an emergency meeting. The manager, Eric, Jake, Emily, and a handful of other department heads gathered in the conference room, their expressions tense. They knew what this meeting was about. Marcus stood at the head of the table, his presence commanding. "Let's not waste time," he began, his voice calm but firm. "Yesterday's incident was unacceptable, and it's not an isolated event. It's a symptom of a much larger problem, one that runs deeper than any single interaction." The room was silent. Some of the staff shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while others avoided Marcus's gaze altogether. "This hotel is meant to represent excellence," Marcus continued, "not just in service or luxury, but in how we treat people. That means every guest, regardless of their appearance, background, or status, deserves respect. What happened yesterday shows we're failing at that." Jake and Emily, sitting near the end of the table, exchanged nervous glances. They hadn't expected their actions to lead to this level of scrutiny, and the weight of their behavior was starting to sink in. "I'm not here to assign blame," Marcus said, his tone softening slightly. "But I am here to hold us accountable. This isn't about one person's actions. It's about a culture that we've allowed to take root. And it ends today." Marcus gestured to a screen at the front of the room, where a slide presentation appeared. The title read, "Unpacking Bias, Recognizing and Addressing Prejudice in Hospitality." "I've brought in someone to help us start this conversation," Marcus said. The door opened, and a woman walked in, her presence immediately commanding attention. She introduced herself as Dr. Natalie Clark, an expert in diversity and inclusion. "Good morning, everyone," Dr. Clark began. "I understand that yesterday's incident has sparked a lot of emotions: anger, shame, frustration. Those feelings are valid. But what matters now is how we move forward." Over the next hour, Dr. Clark led an interactive session, guiding the team through exercises that forced them to confront their biases. She shared real-life examples of discrimination in the hospitality industry, including stories from employees and guests who had faced similar challenges. At one point, she asked the staff to reflect on their own experiences. "Think about a time when you felt judged or dismissed," she said. "How did it make you feel? And how would you ensure that no one else feels that way on your watch?" The room grew quiet as the team processed her words. Emily hesitantly raised her hand. I've been on the other side of this before," she admitted. "I've had people assume things about me because I'm young, or because I started as a receptionist. I know how much it hurts, but I didn't think about that when I was dealing with Mr. Reed. I judged him without realizing it." Dr. Clark nodded. "Thank you for sharing that, Emily. Recognizing our biases is the first step. Now we need to turn that awareness into action." After the session, Marcus stood up again. "This can't just be a one-time training. If we're serious about change, we need to embed these principles into everything we do." He outlined a series of immediate actions. 1. Comprehensive training. Every employee, from front desk staff to senior management, would undergo regular training on diversity, equity, and inclusion. 2. Anonymous feedback. A system would be implemented to allow employees and guests to report incidents of bias without fear of retaliation. 3. Policy review. All hotel policies would be re-examined to ensure they promoted fairness and inclusivity. 4. Community engagement. The hotel would partner with local organizations to promote diversity and support marginalized communities. "I'll also be conducting regular checks myself," Marcus said, his gaze sweeping across the room. "Not to catch anyone out, but to make sure we're staying true to these values. This isn't just about avoiding another incident, it's about creating a culture we can all be proud of." As the meeting ended, Marcus lingered in the conference room, watching as the staff filed out. Some looked inspired, others thoughtful, and a few still seemed wary. But he knew change wouldn't happen overnight. It would take time, effort, and a commitment from everyone involved. Jake and Emily approached him hesitantly. "Mr. Reed," Jake began, his voice low, "I just want to say, I'm sorry for how I acted yesterday. I was wrong, and I see that now." Marcus studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Acknowledging the problem is the first step, Jake. Now it's about what you do next." Emily chimed in. "We'll do better," she said earnestly. "We want to be part of the solution." "I believe you can be," Marcus said, a small smile breaking through his otherwise serious demeanor. "But it's up to you to prove it." That evening, as Marcus walked through the lobby, he noticed subtle changes. Staff members greeted guests with more warmth, their interactions more genuine. It was a small shift, but it was a start. Marcus knew there was still a long way to go. But for the first time since the incident, he felt a glimmer of hope. This was the turning point, a chance to build something better, not just for this hotel, but for every person who walked through its doors. The morning after the meeting, Marcus arrived at the hotel early. The atmosphere in the lobby seemed different, more focused, perhaps even slightly anxious. He noticed staff members moving more deliberately, their interactions with guests showing signs of the training session's influence. But Marcus knew this was just the beginning. Later that day, as Marcus was reviewing documents in his office, he received a call from the front desk. "Mr. Reed," the receptionist said hesitantly, "there's a woman here asking to see you. She says it's important." Marcus frowned. "What's her name?" "She didn't say." "She looks upset," the receptionist replied. Curious, Marcus headed to the lobby. When he arrived, he saw an older woman standing near the entrance, clutching a handbag tightly. Her expression was a mix of determination and unease. As Marcus approached, she turned toward him. "Mr. Reed?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Yes, I'm Marcus Reed. How can I help you?" he said, extending a hand. I'm Helen Carter," she said, taking his hand briefly before pulling it back. "I'm Jake's mother." Marcus blinked in surprise. "Jake's mother?" "Yes," she said, her tone urgent. "I heard about what happened the other day. Jake told me everything about how he treated you, about the meeting, and about what you're trying to change here. I wanted to thank you." "For what?" Marcus asked, genuinely curious. "For giving him a chance," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "Jake has always been a good boy, but he grew up in a world where people taught him the wrong things. You could have fired him on the spot, but instead you gave him an opportunity to learn. That means more than you know." Marcus invited Helen to sit in the lounge where they talked over coffee. She shared stories about Jake's upbringing, how he'd struggled to find his place in the world, how societal biases had shaped his perspective, and how he'd often failed to question the things he'd been taught. "After the meeting, he came home and told me he realized he'd been wrong about so many things," Helen said, tears welling up in her eyes. "He said he wanted to change, not just for his job, but for himself." Marcus listened intently, moved by her sincerity. "Mrs. Carter, I believe everyone deserves a chance to grow," he said. "But change isn't easy and it doesn't happen overnight. Jake has taken the first step, but it's up to him to follow through." Helen nodded, wiping her eyes. "I just wanted you to know how grateful I am," she said. "You didn't just teach him a lesson, you gave him hope." That evening, Marcus called a staff meeting. Standing in front of his team, he recounted his conversation with Helen. "Her words reminded me why we're doing this," he said. "This isn't just about one incident or one employee. It's about creating an environment where people can learn, grow, and do better." He emphasized the importance of accountability, not just for the staff, but for himself as well. "I'm not perfect," Marcus admitted. "I've made mistakes too, but every day I try to be better. And that's what I expect from all of you." The staff nodded, their expression serious. For the first time, Marcus felt that they were truly listening, not out of fear, but out of a shared desire to improve. As the meeting ended, Marcus took a moment to reflect. The journey toward change was just beginning, but the steps they had taken so far felt significant. He looked around the room, seeing a team that was starting to understand the value of empathy, respect, and integrity. Marcus had spent the night drafting a comprehensive action plan for the hotel. His vision was ambitious, to transform his establishment into a national leader in inclusivity and equity. One of the most pressing issues was recruitment. Marcus realized that the lack of diversity within the hotel's staff might have contributed to the attitudes he had encountered. Eric brought forward the hotel's hiring records, which showed a glaring lack of minority representation, particularly in leadership roles. Marcus frowned as he scanned the numbers. "We need to change this," he said. "The more diverse our team, the more perspectives we have, and the less likely it is for prejudice to take root." Natalie suggested partnering with organizations focused on diversity in the workplace. "We can create pipelines for underrepresented communities, offering training programs to prepare people for roles in hospitality," she said. Marcus nodded. "And it's not just about hiring, it's about fostering an environment where everyone feels valued." With the plan finalized, Marcus called another meeting with the entire staff. The mood was a mix of apprehension and curiosity. Everyone knew the hotel was about to undergo significant changes. Standing at the front of the room, Marcus spoke with clarity and conviction. What happened here wasn't just a mistake. It was a failure of leadership, of culture, and of systems. That's on me, and I take full responsibility. But I'm not here to point fingers. I'm here to fix it. He outlined the action plan, explaining the new training programs, the revised hiring policies, and the initiatives aimed at making the hotel a beacon of inclusivity. "This won't be easy," Marcus admitted. "Change never is. But I believe in this team, and I believe we can do better, not just for our guests, but for each other." The following week marked the start of the hotel's first diversity training program. Natalie and her team led sessions that were both eye-opening and emotional. Employees participated in role-playing exercises that forced them to confront their own biases. They shared personal stories of times they had been judged unfairly, or when they had judged others. For Anna, the front desk receptionist, the training was particularly impactful. "I didn't realize how much my assumptions influenced my actions," she admitted during a group discussion. "It's something I need to work on." Jake, who had been defensive in earlier conversations, began to open up as well. "I grew up hearing stereotypes that I never questioned," he said. "This job is the first time I've had to really think about what those beliefs mean and how they hurt people." In addition to internal changes, Marcus launched the hotel's first community outreach initiative. He partnered with a local nonprofit that provided job training for disadvantaged youth, offering internships at the hotel. The program, named Hospitality for All, aimed to give young people a pathway into the hospitality industry. At the program's launch event, Marcus spoke to a group of attendees. "When I started in this business, I faced obstacles that had nothing to do with my skills or work ethic," he said. "This program is about breaking down those barriers so that everyone has a fair chance." As weeks turned into months, the impact of these changes began to show. Guests noticed the difference in how they were treated, with staff going out of their way to make everyone feel welcome. Employees reported feeling more confident and supported, knowing they were part of a workplace that valued equity and inclusion. Marcus himself felt a renewed sense of purpose. He frequently walked the hotel floors, engaging with staff and guests alike. He was no longer just the owner in the shadows. He was a visible leader, setting the tone for the culture he wanted to create. One evening, as Marcus sat in the lounge, he overheard a guest complimenting the staff to the manager. "This place feels different," the guest said. "It's not just about the luxury, it's how they make you feel, like you truly matter." Hearing those words, Marcus felt a sense of pride. The road ahead was still long, but for the first time he felt they were heading in the right direction. The hotel wasn't just a building anymore. It was a symbol of what was possible when people committed to doing better. The changes Marcus initiated at his hotel began to ripple far beyond its polished marble floors and gleaming chandeliers. What started as a deeply personal fight against systemic bias began evolving into a movement that touched the hearts of others in the hospitality industry and beyond. Jake and Emily's transformation continued. They worked harder than ever to internalize the lessons from the training and apply them to their daily interactions. Emily, who initially supported Jake's actions, began volunteering to train new hires on the importance of treating every guest with equal care and attention. One day, Emily was assisting a family at the front desk when their young daughter looked up at her and said, "You're really nice." Emily smiled, but the comment struck her deeply. She remembered how different her behavior had been just weeks ago. She vowed to continue earning that kind of trust, both from guests and from herself. The hotel began attracting a more diverse clientele, with many guests mentioning they had heard about Marcus's story and were eager to experience the new culture he had created. Staff morale improved as the team realized they were part of something larger than their daily tasks. They were part of a movement. But Marcus didn't stop there. He partnered with local schools to provide internships for underrepresented youth in hospitality, ensuring the next generation would have access to opportunities he had to fight so hard for. He also began funding scholarships for students pursuing degrees in hospitality management. One evening, Marcus stood in the hotel lobby, watching guests and staff interact seamlessly. The tension that had once hung in the air was gone, replaced by an atmosphere of warmth and welcome. Jake greeted guests with a genuine smile, Emily patiently assisted a family checking in, and the security team stood attentive but approachable. As Marcus watched, Alicia's words echoed in his mind. "You're not just building a business, you're building a legacy." He realized she was right. His actions had sparked something far bigger than he ever imagined. With a deep sense of fulfillment, Marcus knew there was still work to be done. But for the first time, he felt confident that change was not only possible, it was already happening. The ripple effect of Marcus's actions showed that even one person's determination could inspire a wave of change. By addressing bias head-on and leading by example, he not only transformed his hotel but began reshaping an entire industry. Marcus stood on the steps of a local community center, the warm sunlight reflecting on the building's colorful mural depicting unity and progress. It was here, in neighborhoods like this, that his journey had begun, the same streets where his father worked tirelessly to provide for their family, and where neighbors leaned on one another during tough times, were now the epicenter of his mission to create lasting change. Marcus had formed partnerships with local organizations that shared his vision for equality and opportunity. Together, they launched programs to mentor underprivileged youth, offering career guidance and training for jobs in the hospitality industry. He believed that systemic change required addressing the barriers that kept people marginalized. On this day, Marcus was unveiling a new initiative, the Reed Scholarship Fund, aimed at supporting young people from diverse backgrounds to pursue education in hospitality management, business, or other fields of their choice. The crowd gathered outside the community center, and Marcus stepped up to the podium. "Today we plant a seed for the future," he began, his voice steady but emotional. "This scholarship is not just about education, it's about giving someone the chance to walk through doors that might have been closed to them before. It's about equity, not just opportunity." The audience erupted into applause, a mixture of pride and gratitude rippling through the crowd. Young students in attendance looked up at Marcus with admiration, inspired by his story and the possibilities he was creating for them. Beyond scholarships, Marcus had also invested in job training programs designed to help individuals re-enter the workforce. These programs provided skills for careers in hospitality, customer service, and management. Marcus worked closely with the hotel manager, Helen, to create internships at his hotel, ensuring that the workplace became a space for growth, mentorship, and inclusion. "I want my hotel to be a reflection of the community it serves," Marcus told Helen during a staff meeting. "Diversity isn't just a buzzword, it's a strength." As the programs flourished, Marcus began to see real change in his community. Unemployment rates dropped, and families began to feel hopeful about their future. Marcus knew the fight against systemic bias required more than one person's effort, but every small victory fueled his determination. Months after the incident at the hotel, Marcus returned to the lobby where it all began. This time, the atmosphere was markedly different. The reception area was abuzz with diverse guests and staff working together seamlessly. Jake and Emily, once the culprits of bias, had become advocates for inclusion. They were visibly more confident and approachable, ensuring every guest felt welcome. Jake approached Marcus with a genuine smile. "Mr. Reed, I just wanted to thank you for not giving up on us. The training opened my eyes to things I didn't even realize I was doing." Emily nodded in agreement. "I can't believe how much I've learned. I'm proud to work here now." Marcus smiled warmly. "You've come a long way. Remember, growth is a journey, not a destination. Keep doing the work." The hotel became a model for other businesses in the hospitality industry. Marcus's efforts gained national attention, with leaders across sectors reaching out for guidance on implementing similar changes in their organizations. Invitations poured in for Marcus to speak at conferences and events, where he shared his story and his vision for a more inclusive world. "I didn't start this journey to be recognized," Marcus often said in his speeches. "I started it because I believe in the power of respect, dignity, and understanding. Change begins with each of us." In the years that followed, Marcus's work extended far beyond his hotel. The Reed Scholarship Fund supported hundreds of students, and his programs helped countless individuals find stable, fulfilling careers. Marcus's vision had grown into a movement that inspired communities, industries, and individuals to reflect, grow, and do better. One evening, as Marcus walked through the hotel lobby, he paused to look at a plaque mounted on the wall. It bore his father's favorite words, "Don't be afraid to raise your head and fight for what's right." He smiled, knowing that his father's wisdom would continue to guide him. The story of Marcus Reed is a testament to the power of resilience, leadership, and unwavering commitment to justice. His journey reminds us that one person's actions can spark systemic change, inspiring others to challenge bias and build a better future. If Marcus's story moved you, join us in creating a world where everyone is treated with dignity and respect. Subscribe to our channel for more stories of courage, perseverance, and hope. Together, we can make a difference.